I've done a video like this once before, which I will leave linked in the cards above. Back then it was more normal genres. This time I've tried to go a bit more niche. So some of these are quite niche, some of them are very popular, but hopefully there will be something in here that you like. So the first one is Depressed Woman Moving, which is a genre invented by CJ from CJ Reads, or at least a genre title to describe what a lot of fiction is now, with not a huge amount of plot and a lot of depressed women. And so for historical fiction, I would recommend The Yield by Tara June Winch. And this is cheating slightly because it's dual timeline, and one of the timelines is the present, and it's in the present where there is the depressed woman moving. But there's definitely a historical element to this book, so I think it counts. The Yield tells the story of a woman who has been living in the UK and goes back to Australia after the death of her grandfather Poppy. She has left Australia because of a difficult relationship with her family. While she has been away, her grandfather has been working on a project which is to create a dictionary of Wiradjuri words, because he is a Wiradjuri man and he is trying to hold on to the language of his people. And this story intercuts her story of moving back home, her relationship with her grandmother and with her sister who is no longer there, and also the relationship of the house and the land, and miners trying to do compulsory purchase on the house, and those things moving on around her as she tries to reconnect with her grandfather through this dictionary. And we see it is interspersed with entries from this dictionary of Wiradjuri words that describe his life, so that we get a sort of autobiography through dictionary definitions, which I think is really interesting. It's actually 3 timelines, because there is also a diary from a white Christian missionary who set up a school for Wiradjuri people in the turn of the 20th century in the same area of Australia in which they now live. And that part covers the history of missionaries and of colonialism through schools, so kind of similar to residential schools in Canada, although this one itself, whilst it does still have racist and colonial overtones, compared to what is going on around. The part that's in modern day is that depressed woman moving vibe. Our main character is certainly depressed, dealing with grief and with traumas of the past, as she is trying to come to terms with seeing her family and her relationship with her family and uncovering what happened in the past. So there is a slight element of mystery, but it's not a huge plot. It's mostly just a very moving, very emotional account of her experience trying to reconnect with her family, interspersed with moments of Wiradjuri history from the middle of the 20th century and the early part of the 20th century. Next we have Goblin Core, which I definitely think is more of a niche fashion thing than a literary genre, although the idea of Goblin Mode and going Goblin Mode was definitely zeitgeisty, I think, towards the beginning of last year, so I'm definitely late to the party. But in terms of Goblin Mode and what that conjures for me in historical fiction, I would say Till by Daniel Kellman. Till is a trickster character from German mythology, so akin to a goblin in that way, although not really. But in this book he has been moved forward in time to German history of the 17th century and the 30 Years' War, and we follow his life as a child, living in a small town with a miller and hopping about different time periods throughout that 30 Years' War and various different characters' perspectives. He works as a jester in a court. There is a moment of like mass hysteria involving Till and his show, and there are moments in the woods. It definitely has a very dark fairy tale tinge to it because of that, like what happens in the woods, and the woods as a place of magic. There are also references to witch trials and various other things. It is really incredibly beautifully written, very dark, very twisty, very visceral. There's a moment of almost being buried alive, which was really, really difficult to read, and I think it has that goblin energy of being very earthy and kind of gross and dark, as I said, and also the element of a fairy tale. I would also recommend The Giant O'Brien by Hilary Mantel, which is based on the true story of a very tall man from Ireland who came across to London to find his fortune in the 17th century. Again, no, the 18th century this time. In the 18th century, and his body is pursued by a Scottish surgeon who is obsessed with abnormal bodies and with disease, because this man is very, very tall. He wants his skeleton, and it is a story about colonialism, but it is also a story about storytelling, and I think it has elements of the Fae, or the gentlefolk, whatever you wish to call those people of Irish mythology, as part of the story. The concept of a traveller going to a new world and getting caught up in the wonders of that world only to find himself stripped naked and 100 years in the future, as a traditional Irish tale is both part of the narrative and resonant through the narrative. It is another very like dark, gritty, muddy kind of a book in terms of the description, in terms of the world that it is building. It goes to the poverty of Ireland at the time, and also the experience of the Irish in London during colonial times, and it is another very bodily, very visceral, very dark book with elements of a kind of twisted humour, which I think it shares with Till and also with kind of a goblin vibe in general. Next we have Weird Girl Lit, which is definitely something that I have read. I have a video, I believe. I have a vlog that I will leave linked in the cards above where I was reading Weird Girl books. But one that I don't see many people recommend, possibly because it's by a man, is A General Theory of Oblivion by Jose Eduardo Aguilusa. It is by a man, but it is about a woman, so I think it counts as Weird Girl Lit. It is set in Angola, and it is about a woman who left Portugal because of a rape that she experienced there, and so she moves to Angola to be with her sister and her sister's husband. But Angola is on the brink of independence, and when the fight for independence breaks out, her sister and her husband, they flee back to Portugal, taking with them some Angolan diamonds. And rather than face what is going on outside, the woman bricks herself into her apartment building and does not leave for several decades, I believe, living off what she can grow and the rain that comes in through the window. And outside her there is kind of a heisty quest for these diamonds that have gone missing. There is organised crime and the fallout of the fight for independence and the lawlessness that abounds in the country afterwards. And so we go through different perspectives, but we are particularly focused on this one woman who is isolated all by herself, locked in this apartment building. And so it is very strange. It has a very kind of slantwise style of writing that feels very off-kilter, makes you feel uncomfortable. There are some elements of potential magical realism, but you're never quite sure what is metaphorical and what is actually true, what is actually going on. It has that element of darkness tinged with whimsy, which I think is I really enjoy in reading, and definitely for me is what Weird Girl Lit is all about. It is very slow moving, very insular, very dark, all of the things that I think are perfect for Weird Girl Lit readers. Next one that is kind of similar is Unhinged Women, but this is more in the feminine rage type of things, the kind of good for her narrative that I know is super popular. And in terms of historical fiction, there are loads of books that fit this feminine rage, but for me the one that I would recommend is The Confessions of Franny Langton by Sarah Collins. This one is set in London, is set between Jamaica and London in the early part of the 19th century, about a woman who grows up enslaved in Jamaica. She becomes involved in the terrible things that are going on the plantation where she is enslaved, the things that the slaver is involved in, the experiments and things, and ends up being taken to England, where slavery is now illegal, and gifted to a family there. And she becomes a servant there, but because she knows no one and has no access to anything, she's basically still enslaved. And we follow her. But what we do know at the beginning is that she is writing her autobiography, her narrative, from jail after having been convicted for double homicide. And so we know that there is going to be a murder that happens. And this novel is a queer novel, a kind of dark, twisted love story that is most uncomfortable. Like, it's not a romance, but it is a story of a romance between two people, and it is one of violence and of the treatment of women and also of enslaved people and racism, and it is very dark and gothic. It is definitely a gothic story that has a lot of the hallmarks of that, elements of feeling supernatural almost, and of dark, creepy houses and people not knowing who you can trust. A narrative about class and race and gender and how those things intersect, and white womaning. And it is really, really well done, very dark, enjoyable, whilst also being horrible at the same time. That kind of gothic, that enjoyment you can get from a gothic novel, but not shying away from talking about dark things either. And as I said, it has that unhinged, feminine rage, good for her kind of aspect to it. Now, one that I've seen on Bookstagram is I'm Scared and It's Snowing. I saw a few people giving out recommendations for like winter horror stories in this vibe on Bookstagram, with the I'm scared and it's snowing kind of being the overarching theme for that. The one that I would recommend for this genre is The Mercies by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. This is set on a small island off the north coast of Norway called Finnmark, where a giant storm has killed most of the men in the village, and so the women are having to fend for themselves. This is during the time of the witch hunts, and the King of Denmark is sending people around to hunt for witches, and one of these men makes his way north with his new bride to this island. So as it is set in the far north, it definitely is a cold novel, one that is very much about survival in an extreme place, a place of extreme weather and of extreme isolation. It is also about small communities and turning against one another, or how they support one another, and the violence of religion and of extreme fervour, religious fervour and belief, and of course a book about sexism. It is also another one with queer relationships involved in it, people exploring different ways to exist within the confines of the 17th century ideal. But it is one that, when this man arrives and when we start to see the entrapment, the way these women are under the thumb and under the power of men and don't have much control, that sense of impending doom, that sense of something bad is going to happen, definitely gives it I'm scared vibes, as alongside the it's snowing, because we are set in northern climes. The atmosphere of this book is excellent. I really love the writing, and I think all of the characters are also really beautifully drawn. Dark academia. This is the genre that I feel like has been talked about the most over the past few years. It is definitely very popular, very well known, and in terms of historical fiction, I couldn't think of many that are set in schools that I would definitely recommend, schools or universities. I haven't read that much historical fiction. I've read classics and various other things, but in terms of historical fiction, one that I do think fits the dark academia vibe is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. I talk about this book all of the time, but instead of being set at a university, it is set in a court. But because it is about the Tudors, which is something that we study relentlessly at schools here in the UK, I think it has academia vibes. It is set in the Tudor court. It follows the story of Thomas Cromwell from his birth and over the course of the 3 books until his death. The first book, Wolf Hall, is about his becoming the protege of Thomas Wolsey, who is a cardinal, as Henry VIII is trying to break off his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. And I definitely think it has that dark academia feel. There is a lot. Thomas Cromwell is a lawyer, and they are trying to find an excuse for this marriage to be broken off. So there is an element of research and studying. There is also Machiavellian machinations of the court and people trying to position themselves in terms of power. And just the vibe of this book is very dark. It feels like it is by candlelight whilst you are reading it, even though obviously I did not read it by candlelight. There is something about the way that Mantel describes the Tudor court that makes it feel very like you are set in a time before electricity. It is super atmospheric, super absorbing, and really great to read. We are on the shoulder of Thomas Cromwell from this close third-person perspective, where he is usually Cromwell. I think it has the intrigue that one wants from dark academia, and definitely the atmosphere as well, but it is not set in an academic setting. It has much more to it than that. There's so much to read into it. It is a ghost story, and a story about class and power, and just one of the best written books that I have ever read. So I think if you are into dark academia and you want to get into more of literary historical fiction, there's no better place to go than Hilary Mantel. Speaking of ghost stories, if you are a fan of ghost stories, I love a literary ghost story, so I could talk about this for ages, but there are definitely historical fiction ghosts as well that come up very often. One of my favourites is Cartolin Street by Magda Szabo, which is set in Hungary before, during and after the Second World War, about 3 families who live next door to one another. And it is not a linear time period. We jump back and forth between these different times and from different perspectives of different people in the family during the Nazi occupation, and also whilst Hungary is under Soviet control. One of these families is a Jewish family, and this is where the ghosts and the haunting comes in. There is a haunting that happens throughout the novel from one of these characters as the characters move forward through the Soviet time period. It's very much a story about stories as well. There is a lot about putting on plays and performances that happen in earlier parts of the novel, and then also the being watched and the shipping one another to the authorities that happened under the Soviets and under the Nazis. This idea of control and power through watching and through observation, grief and blame, and how people deal with grief in this situation, how our families are splintered by the trauma that happened to them. It is a very slow moving, introspective, ideas based novel, although I do think the characters in this one are quite alive as well, and another one that would really tug at your heartstrings and make you cry, and I think an excellent piece of historical fiction. I would also recommend The Betrayed by Riene Akake Melvin, which is set in the Philippines at the end of the Marcos regime. This is about the children of a man who had been a trade unionist against the Marcos regime, who was assassinated in San Francisco, and they return to the Philippines where one of their husbands is running for political office, and he is from a family that had been well off during the Marcos regime. And this is set during a year where there are 5 coups against the government, and running for political office is a very risky business. The 2 sisters, one is married to the man, one is in love with the man, and the one who is married to him is pregnant and also sees ghosts. And the ghost of her father is really, really haunting her, as well as the ghost of the Marcos regime, the ghost of what has happened in the Philippines and the violence that occurred. We travel around the Philippines from Manila and through to various different islands as this man is on campaign, and he takes the sister he is not married to with him, and they also come across the ghosts of the Marcos regime, although in a more literal form. It is another incredibly atmospheric novel. You really feel like you are in the setting. Another slow-moving, character-focused novel that feels very dark, very sticky. It is a very unhappy book to read. None of our characters are particularly likeable people, and none of our characters do you particularly want to get the things that they want in the book, but it is still really interesting to follow the way that politics has pervaded all of their lives, and the reflection of this in the idea of ghosts and hauntings. Now, the next one is Studio Ghibli Cottage Core vibes, which is another one of those aesthetics that has definitely taken over the internet in the past 5 years. With Studio Ghibli though, I always feel like there is something slightly sinister in the background, or something slightly off, and also our characters are not quite there are also slightly odd and slightly different characters. And so the book that I would recommend that is of this vibe is North Woods by Daniel Mason. It is about a cottage in the woods, so it definitely is Cottage Core vibes. It follows the history of a dwelling in Massachusetts from the Puritan times up until the present day, through the various different people who live there, and again has ghosts haunting it, which I do also think are a theme in Ghibli. It is more a collection of interconnected short stories than it is really a novel, because the gut-binding theme is this dwelling, which grows and shrinks again over the course of history. It starts with 2 lovers who are escaping from a puritanical plays through a woman who is kidnapped by the indigenous people during a fight between the colonialists and the indigenous people, through again a man who becomes obsessed with apples and planting an orchard in this place. And it carries on through history with a zany sex comedy with a psychic, through to the writings of a misogynistic psychologist, and the ramblings of someone who has been institutionalized. It is a really beautiful book where the woods feel almost like a character in the novel, and so it has that cottagecore vibe. It also has kind of tragic romance and characters that you can really fall in love with, and a kind of sense of heartbreak, as well as some really humorous moments. And again, as I said, that thread linking them, the way that the past continues on in the future and the resonances of the past through to the present. Again, I really love this way that this one is written, and I think it is perfect for if you are looking for something cozy but not unthoughtful. And then finally, the final one on this list is comfort reads. If you love to read comforting, cozy books, the historical fiction I would recommend for you is Still Life by Sarah Winman. I definitely think I need to reread this book, and it would be a comfort read for me. It is set in Florence, in the middle of the 20th century, beginning during the Second World War, where our main character Ulysses meets a woman who is looking at art that the Nazis have stolen to tell them where it should go back to, and at the same time possibly is a spy. And then she tells him to go to Florence because something amazing will happen to him there, and he does, and it does. But then he heads back to the East End of London, where he is from, to the pub with this misfit cast of characters who all live in this pub, and gets back to his old life. But one day a letter comes from Florence to tell him that he has a reason to go back there, and he takes several of his friends with him back to Florence. And it just follows the course of their life, and also the course of the life of this woman who may or may not be a spy, and is mostly just about this big cast of characters, this found family. If you find comfort in found family, I definitely think this book would work for you. It is really beautifully written, really immersive. You feel like you are in Florence. The food, the art, all of this romanticization of life, I think definitely fits in with still life. And yet at the same time, it is not twee, or at least not too twee and not too sickly. It has elements of the darker side of life and of how to not overcome, but to accept that. I think acceptance is definitely a big part of this novel. It is a big, queer, confusing, dysfunctional family, and one that I think is just so lovely to read. It doesn't have a plot, much of a plot in terms of beats to hit. It just is following through the course of their lives, and I definitely think is a wonderful read. Charming, humorous, warm, absolutely lovely. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any more genres you would like some recommendations for, and I will try and reply to your comments with something that I come up with. Hopefully I can. If you are new here, my name is Roisin. I put out new videos twice a week, every Tuesday and Friday, so I will be putting out a video again soon. If there's anything you'd like to see from me, definitely leave that in the comments down below as well. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, and to subscribe, because I will see you again very soon. Thank you for watching. Bye!